What if I told you that the youngest MVP in NBA history would be fighting for his basketball career just a few years later?
Finds Rose. Rose trying to get open, fires away. Bang! It's over!
How does a generational talent go from being on top of the world to struggling to find his place in the league? The story of Derrick Rose is one of triumph, tragedy, and an unbreakable spirit. Let's take a trip back to the south side of Chicago in the early 2000s. In one of the city's toughest neighborhoods, a young kid named Derrick Rose was turning heads on the basketball court. Growing up in Englewood, Rose had basketball in his blood. His older brothers taught him the game on the neighborhood courts, sharpening his skills and toughening him up, but even they couldn't have predicted just how special their little brother would become. By the time Rose hit high school at Simeon Career Academy, the buzz was already building. This kid wasn't just good, he was potentially generational. In his junior year, Rose led Simeon to its first state championship since 1984. The next year, he did it again, cementing his status as a Chicago basketball legend before he'd even graduated. College scouts were drooling, and it wasn't hard to see why. After high school, Rose took his talents to Memphis to play for coach John Calipari. Now, we've seen plenty of high school phenoms struggle with the transition to college ball, but Rose, he made it look easy. In his lone season at Memphis, Rose averaged 14.9 points, 4.7 assists, and 4.5 rebounds per game. But those stats don't tell the whole story. Rose led the Tigers to a 38-2 record and a trip to the national championship game. Sure, there was some controversy later about his SAT scores, but on the court, Rose proved he was the real deal.
Shooting free throws 58% as a team.
Derrick Rose for three.
What made Rose special in college was the same thing that made him a star in high school: his ability to take over games when it mattered most. In the Final Four against UCLA, Rose dropped 25 points and 9 rebounds, showing he could shine on the biggest stage. After that impressive college season, there was no doubt Rose was headed to the NBA. And wouldn't you know it, his hometown Chicago Bulls had the first pick in the 2008 draft. It was like a picture-perfect movie script, the local kid coming home to save the franchise. Rose didn't disappoint in his rookie year. He averaged 16.8 points and 6.3 assists per game, earning Rookie of the Year honors. Over the next couple of years, Rose kept getting better and better. In his second season, he made his first All-Star team. But it was his third year in the league where Rose truly ascended to superstardom. The 2010-11 season was when Derrick Rose became Derrick Rose. We're talking about a guy who averaged 25 points and 7.7 assists per game, leading the Bulls to the best record in the NBA. Rose's play was electrifying. He could break down any defender, finish through contact at the rim, and hit clutch shots when it mattered most. At the end of that season, Rose was named the NBA's most valuable player. At just 22 years old, he was the youngest MVP in league history. Think about that for a second. In a league with LeBron James, Kobe Bryant, and other established superstars, it was Rose who took home the game's highest individual honor.
In the NBA, you are the youngest MVP in NBA history.
So how good was Derrick Rose actually? At his peak, he was one of the most unstoppable forces the NBA had ever seen. We're talking about a point guard with the explosiveness of a young Michael Jordan, the court vision of a Magic Johnson, and a competitive fire that burned as hot as anyone's in the league. Rose's game was built on his otherworldly athleticism. He could change direction on a dime, explode to the rim in the blink of an eye, and finish over much taller defenders. His first step was so quick it often left defenders looking like they were stuck in cement. But Rose wasn't just an athlete, he was a skilled basketball player. His ball handling was elite, allowing him to weave through defenses like a hot knife through butter. His passing was crisp and creative, often finding teammates for easy baskets when the defense collapsed on him. And then there was his clutch gene. Rose had a knack for hitting big shots in crucial moments. Whether it was a game-winning jumper or a momentum-shifting drive to the basket, Rose seemed to thrive when the pressure was highest. At his peak, Rose was a nightmare for opposing coaches to game plan against. Double team him, and he'd find the open man. Play him one-on-one, and he'd blow by his defender. Sag off him, and he'd knock down the jumper. There just didn't seem to be a good way to stop him. Just when it seemed like Rose was on track to become one of the all-time greats, disaster struck. In the first game of the 2012 playoffs, Rose suffered a devastating ACL tear in his left knee. In an instant, the trajectory of his career changed forever. The injury kept Rose out for the entire 2012-13 season. Bulls fans held their breath, hoping their superstar would return to his MVP form. But when Rose came back the next season, he played just 10 games before suffering another knee injury. This time, a torn meniscus in his right knee. It was a cruel twist of fate. The very explosiveness that made Rose so special also put tremendous stress on his body, particularly his knees. The player who once seemed indestructible was now facing a long, uncertain road back to the court. Over the next few years, Rose's career became a series of comebacks and setbacks. He'd show flashes of his old brilliance, only to be sidelined by another injury. The Bulls, once seen as a potential dynasty with Rose at the helm, never quite reached those heights again. Despite the challenges, Rose refused to give up. He reinvented his game, relying less on pure athleticism and more on skill and craftiness. He developed a more reliable jump shot and became a better game manager. But there was no denying that the Rose we saw post-injuries was a different player than the one who won MVP.
Runner short, here comes Rose, full throttle down the lane.
In 2016, the Bulls traded Rose to the New York Knicks, ending his tenure with his hometown team. It was a bittersweet moment for Chicago fans, who had dreamed of Rose leading the Bulls back to championship glory. After leaving Chicago, Rose bounced around the league. He had stints with the Knicks, Cavaliers, Timberwolves, and Pistons. At times, it seemed like his career might be over, but Rose kept pushing, kept working, kept believing he still had something to offer. In Minnesota, playing for his old Bulls coach Tom Thibodeau, Rose began to find his footing again. He wasn't the same player who won MVP, but he was still effective. In fact, on Halloween night in 2018, Rose turned back the clock and dropped 50 points against the Jazz. It was a reminder of just how special he could be. Rose's resilience paid off. He carved out a role as a valuable sixth man, providing scoring punch and veteran leadership off the bench. While he was no longer a superstar, he proved he could still contribute at a high level. So, how do we evaluate Derrick Rose's career? It's not an easy question to answer. On one hand, we have a player who reached the absolute pinnacle of the sport, winning MVP at an age when most players are still finding their footing in the league. Rose's peak, though brief, was as brilliant as any player in NBA history. On the other hand, we have the what-ifs. What if Rose had stayed healthy? Could he have led the Bulls to a championship?
Got Korver on the wing. Here's Rose all the way. And the
Would he be remembered as one of the greatest point guards ever? These are questions we'll never have answers to, but they'll always be part of Rose's story. What we can say for certain is this. At his best, Derrick Rose was one of the most electrifying players the NBA has ever seen. His combination of speed, agility, and explosiveness was truly unique. He could dominate a game in a way few point guards ever have. Perhaps the most enduring part of Rose's legacy is his resilience. Here's a guy who went from being the youngest MVP in league history to wondering if he'd ever play again. But he never gave up. He fought through the injuries, the doubts, the setbacks. He reinvented his game and found ways to stay relevant in a league that's always evolving. As we look to the future, who knows what the next twist in Rose's story might be? One thing's for certain, whether he's dropping 50 points in a throwback performance or providing steady leadership off the bench, Derrick Rose will always be a player worth watching. His journey reminds us that in sports, as in life, it's not about how many times you get knocked down. It's about how many times you get back up. But hey, that's just my take. What do you think about Rose's journey? Was he destined for all-time greatness before injuries derailed his career? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this deep dive, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. We're always breaking down the biggest stories and trends in the NBA, and you won't want to miss our future videos. And hey, while you're at it, smash that bell icon too. That way, you'll be notified as soon as we drop new content. Trust me, with how quickly things change in the NBA, you'll want to stay up to date.